Welcome to video number 2 for Chapter 6, The Duel for North America. In this video, we'll learn about the events of the French and Indian War. George Washington inaugurated war with France. The Ohio Valley became the chief bone of contention between the French and the British. For the British, it was a critical area for westward movement. The French needed it to link their Canadian holdings to those of the lower Mississippi Valley. The British colonists were determined to fight for their economic security and supremacy. Ohio Valley rivalry increased tensions. The French erected a chain of forts along the Ohio River. Fort Duquesne, a French fort, was at the pivotal point where the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers joined to form the Ohio River, the later site of the present-day city of Pittsburgh. In 1754, the governor of Virginia sent young George Washington to Ohio country to secure the Virginians' claim. In this skirmish, Washington met some French troops about 40 miles from Fort Duquesne and fired on them. The French leader was killed and his men retreated. The French then returned and surrounded Washington. And Washington, after a 10-hour siege, surrendered but was allowed to march his troops away with honor. In response, the British brutally uprooted French Acadians and scattered them as far as Louisiana. The descendants of these people are called Cajuns. This is map 6.5, showing the French and Indian War in North America, which took place from 1754 to 1760. Global war and colonial disunity was present during this time period. The first 3 Anglo-French colonial wars started in Europe, but the 4th one started in America. The French and Indian War, started by Washington in the Ohio Valley in 1754, widened after 2 years into the 7 Years' War, which took place not only in America, but in Europe, in the West Indies, in Africa, the Philippines, and on the ocean. The 7 Years' War was a 7-sea war. Map 6.6 shows the global scale of the 7 Years' War. This is termed among one of the first of the truly world wars of the modern era, because it sucked in several nations that did battle around the world. The crisis demanded concerted action. In 1754, the British government summoned an intercolonial congress to meet at Albany, New York. Only 7 colonies sent delegates. The immediate purpose was to control the Iroquois tribes that were loyal to Britain. The longer-range goal was to increase colonial unity and thus bolster the common defense against France. Benjamin Franklin was the leading spirit at the Albany Congress. He published the famous cartoon, Join or Die. He presented a well-devised but premature scheme for colonial home rule. The Albany delegates unanimously adopted it, but individual colonies then rejected it, as did the British government. This is a picture of the famous cartoon by Benjamin Franklin. Delaware and Georgia were omitted. Franklin's scheme was to try to unify the colonies during this time period. To colonists, it did not give them enough independence, but to the British, it gave too much independence to the colonies. Franklin observed that everyone agreed on the need for union, but were distracted when they tried to agree on the details. The opening clashes of the war went badly for the British. General Edward Braddock was sent to Virginia with a strong detachment of British regulars, which means British soldiers. He set out in 1755 with 2,000 men to capture Fort Duquesne. On his way, he met a smaller French and Indian army. Washington had 2 horses shot out from under him, and 4 bullets actually pierced his coat. General Braddock was fatally wounded. The British were routed and suffered large losses. Inflamed by easy victory, Indians launched assaults from Pennsylvania to North Carolina on the colonists. Washington, with 300 men, tried to defend the frontier, but the British experienced defeat after William Pitt was Britain's superlative leader. He was known as the Great Commoner, and in 1757 he became a key leader in the London government. He downplayed the assaults on the French West Indies, and he concentrated on the vital Quebec-Montreal area of Canada, and he picked young and energetic military leaders. In 1758, he dispatched an expedition that took Louisbourg, the first major British victory. He sent James Wolfe to take Quebec. Wolfe battled the Marquis de Montcalm's forces on the Plains of Abraham outside of Quebec. Both commanders were fatally wounded, and the French were defeated, and Quebec surrendered. This is a picture titled "The View of Taking Quebec, 1759", showing the British forces scaling the rocky cliffs of Quebec, which are also lead up to what's called the Plains of Abraham. They defeated the French army, defending the city. The following year, Montreal, which was France's last holding in North America, surrendered. Fighting continued in the Caribbean, Europe, and the Philippines for 2 more years until the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763, which eliminated France as a colonial power in North America. The Battle of Quebec in 1759 was one of the most significant battles in British and American history. When Montreal fell in 1760, the French flag fluttered for the last time in Canada. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 displaced the French Empire from the North American continent. The French were able to maintain several small but valuable sugar islands in the West Indies. France also received 2 never-to-be-fortified islets in the Gulf of St. Lawrence for fishing stations. But as a final blow, France ceded to Spain all of the trans-Mississippi Louisiana, including the port of New Orleans. Great Britain was to emerge as a result of the French and Indian War as the dominant power in North America and the leading world naval power. These 2 maps show the difference in colonial holdings both before the French and Indian War and after. The first map, 6.7a, shows North America before 1754, and it shows the British colonial holdings up here in Canada and then along the east coast where the colonies are in North America. It shows the French holdings having the Louisiana area up into Canada. The Spanish holdings remain down in the Mexico area and the southwestern part of North America, and then Russian holdings along the coast of what would eventually become Alaska and parts of northern Canada. Now, after the war, as of 1763 and after the Treaty of Paris, you have map 6.7b showing the change in colonial holdings. You have British holdings now this area of North America, including the colonies, but now areas previously held by the French. The French holdings no longer exist at all in North America. The Spanish holdings have increased slightly into the center portion of North America, and they still hold the area of Mexico in the southwestern part of the United States, and the Russian holdings have increased slightly as well. But the major outcome of this war is that the French were forced to give up all of their North American holdings, and they only maintained a small amount of holdings in the West Indies, in the Sugar Islands. But Britain becomes the dominant power in North America.